One minute I was doing what I'd done for decades, speaking calmly across my desk, explaining a student's progress like it was just another routine conversation, and the next, my words stopped obeying me. It wasn't a pause to think. The sentence was already built inside my head, clean and complete, like it had been typed out. But when I tried to send it to my mouth, something broke along the way. My lips moved, my jaw tried, and the sound that came out wasn't the sentence I meant. It was wrong, jagged, as if my tongue had forgotten the rules it had followed my entire life. The classroom felt painfully normal. Fluorescent lights, the dry smell of marker ink, parents murmuring politely in the hallway, waiting their turn. I tried to smile it off, because that's what I've always done when my body or my heart started acting up. Keep it pleasant. Keep it contained. Don't make it anyone else's problem. Then my right arm went heavy in my lap, like it had quietly resigned. The room tilted, only slightly, like the world had shifted a few degrees and refused to straighten itself. I reached for the edge of my desk, and my right hand didn't cooperate. I slid down the wall behind my chair, slow enough to feel every inch of embarrassment, trying to make it look like I'd simply dropped something. Just picture this for a moment. You're fully awake, fully aware, and your body has stopped taking instructions. The scariest part wasn't the ambulance or the hospital. It was one clean thought that cut through everything. My son was going to walk into whatever came next, and I might never be able to say what mattered. Before that night, my life looked stable from the outside, which is the kind of word people use when they don't want to look too closely. I was 56, a high school English teacher, the dependable one, the calm one, the person who could guide teenagers through emotions they didn't have language for yet. I could take a student's messy paragraph and show them the sentence that mattered, the one they were afraid to write. I could read between the lines of other people's lives. I just didn't do that with my own. After my divorce, I trained myself into a version of fine that didn't require honesty. I became pleasant. That was my default setting. Pleasant meant no conflict. Pleasant meant I didn't ask for help. Pleasant meant I didn't admit how quiet my house felt at night, or how loneliness can sit in a room like an extra piece of furniture. I told myself I liked the independence. I told myself I was low maintenance. And some days I even believed it. My son was already grown by then, and our relationship didn't break in some dramatic explosion. There wasn't a big fight that made it easy to point to one moment and blame it. We drifted instead. A text message here, a missed call there. Holidays that turned into maybe next time. Conversations that stayed polite and surface level, because anything deeper felt like stepping onto ice that might crack. Have you ever watched distance become normal without meaning for it to? That's what happened. I kept telling myself I'd fix it when life calmed down, when school got less busy, when I felt more rested, when I found the right words. I treated reconciliation like a future project, something I could schedule when everything else was under control. Meanwhile, my body was giving me warnings I treated like inconveniences. Headaches that became familiar. Blood pressure medication I forgot more often than I took. Long days that left me drained in a way sleep didn't repair. I was good at advising people to take care of themselves and bad at applying the advice to me. And hanging over all of it was one sentence I kept postponing. Simple, not dramatic, just honest, because I was afraid of what it would unlock once I said it out loud. Looking back, the frightening part wasn't that my life changed in an instant. It was that my body tried to warn me in small, almost polite ways first, and I treated those warnings like background noise. It started with mornings that didn't feel clean anymore. I'd wake up tired, not from one bad night of sleep, but with a heavier fatigue that seemed to live in my muscles. My neck would feel tight. Pressure would settle behind my eyes like weather moving in, and I'd rub my temples while making coffee, already deciding it didn't count as serious because I could still function. Functioning became my standard for fine. At school, I'd have moments where I felt slightly off balance, like my body was half a step behind my mind. I'd be standing at the board and notice I was gripping the marker too hard, or that my hand felt clumsy for a second. I dropped pens more often. I fumbled keys. I laughed at myself in the hallway and blamed it on being tired, because tired is socially acceptable. Scared isn't. The medication was its own quiet story. The bottle sat on my counter like a small admission I didn't want to make. I took the pills for a while, then missed a day, then another. Sometimes I forgot. Sometimes I didn't refill on time. Sometimes I was simply stubborn, telling myself that if I felt okay, I must be okay. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became, I'll handle it soon. I didn't think of it as neglect. I thought of it as being busy. And loneliness makes neglect easier. It doesn't have to be dramatic loneliness, either. Mine was mostly quiet. A house that stayed too still in the evenings. Meals eaten standing up. Television on for noise. Papers spread across the kitchen table because grading gave me something productive to do instead of sitting with myself. Work kept me useful. Work kept me distracted. Work kept me from calling my son. Because the truth is, I almost called him more times than I can count. I'd see something that reminded me of him. An old song on the radio. A joke I knew he would have laughed at. A kid in my classroom with his same stubborn expression, and for a moment my hand would drift toward my phone. Then I'd stop. I'd tell myself I didn't want to bother him. I'd tell myself he was busy. I'd tell myself I needed to get my thoughts together first. The honest reason was simpler. I was afraid of what I'd hear in his voice if I finally tried to be real. Have you ever postponed an apology because you didn't want to feel what comes after it? That was me. For years. I waited for a perfect moment to say a simple sentence, as if perfect timing could protect me from vulnerability. The week before parent-teacher night, the headaches got sharper. I remember standing in my classroom after the final bell and feeling sweat at the back of my neck even though the room wasn't hot. I remember reaching for a stack of papers and feeling my right hand hesitate, like it needed an extra second to remember how to grip. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was nothing. And because it didn't immediately knock me down, I took that as proof I could keep ignoring it. Parent-teacher night has a specific kind of pressure that people don't talk about. It's polite on the surface, but underneath, everyone is tense in a quiet, controlled way. Parents worried about their kids, teachers trying to sound confident, students lingering in hallways like they're eavesdropping on their own future. The building smelled like waxed floors and dry erase markers, and the fluorescent lights made everything look a little too sharp, a little too exposed. I set my desk up the way I always did, because routine had become my armor. Papers stacked neatly. Grade sheets ready. Laptop open. A cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, because I kept forgetting to drink it between conversations. I told myself it was just another long evening. Just another set of polite explanations and careful words. The first few conferences went smoothly. My voice sounded steady. My face did the teacher smile automatically. I used the same measured phrases I'd used for years. Balanced, professional, kind enough to soften criticism without lying. It was almost comforting, the way the script carried me. Then I sat across from a father whose expression was tired rather than angry, and I began explaining his daughter's missing assignments. The sentence formed in my head cleanly, the way sentences always had for me. I could already see where I was going with it. The gentle turn toward, here's how we fix it. The reassuring ending. Halfway through, my mouth betrayed me. At first it felt like a simple stumble, like I'd tripped over a word. I tried to restart. The thought was still there, perfectly intact, so I assumed my mouth would catch up. But when I pushed the next word out, it came out wrong again. Not a mispronunciation. Something stranger, like my tongue had lost the map. I smiled to cover it, because that's what I did when something inside me felt unstable. I tried to keep eye contact, tried to keep the moment normal. I even nodded as if I were still speaking clearly, like I could bluff my way through my own body. Then my right arm went heavy in my lap. It wasn't pain. It was absence. It felt like the weight of my arm had doubled and my muscles had quietly stopped listening. I stared at my hand like it was an unfamiliar object. The father's eyebrows tightened, his concern replacing impatience. The room tilted, just slightly, but enough to make my stomach drop. It was like the floor had decided to lean away from me. I reached for the edge of the desk to steady myself, and my right hand didn't find it the way it should have. My fingers grazed the surface and slid off, clumsy and delayed. In that instant, fear arrived with a sharpness I've never felt before. Not the slow worry of a headache, not the manageable stress of a hard week. This was primal. This was my brain recognizing, before I could fully accept it, that something was going very wrong. I tried to say, just a second. What came out wasn't that. It was a broken sound, a shape without meaning. The father stood halfway up from his chair, uncertain, like he didn't want to invade my space but didn't want to ignore what he was seeing. I could feel eyes from the hallway turning toward my open door. I could hear voices outside, muffled conversations, footsteps, the normal noise of a school night. and the normality of it made me feel even more unreal. I attempted to stand, because standing is what you do when you want to look in control. My legs refused to cooperate. My right side felt like it had detached from the plan. My balance disappeared in a way that felt humiliating and frightening at the same time. I slid down the wall behind my chair, slow enough to register every second of it. The scrape of my shoulder against painted cinder block, the cold shock of the floor through my clothes, the way my breath came shallow and fast because my body didn't know what else to do. Someone said my name. I heard it. I understood it. I couldn't answer with it. A coworker appeared in the doorway quickly, one of the teachers from the next classroom. Her face changed the moment she saw me on the floor. She knelt beside me, close enough that I caught a faint scent of her perfume mixed with the sterile smell of the building. She asked me questions, simple questions, and I could see her trying to keep her voice calm, like calmness might keep me anchored. She asked me to squeeze her hand. My left hand squeezed. My right hand barely moved. Just picture this for a moment. Being fully aware while your body fails a basic test right in front of you, and knowing that everyone can see it. The hallway sound shifted. Chairs scraped. Someone told students to step back. The father murmured something I couldn't fully track, his voice distorted by the way my senses were narrowing. My coworker pulled out her phone. Her fingers shook as she dialed. I heard her speaking faster than normal, describing symptoms in urgent, clipped phrases. I caught fragments. Can't speak. Right side sudden. Please hurry. When the paramedics arrived, the room filled with a different kind of energy, professional, focused, fast. They asked me my name, the date, where I was. I knew every answer. My mouth couldn't deliver them. One of them shone a light in my eyes. Another asked me to smile. I tried. One side of my face lagged behind the other, and the recognition on their faces told me what I didn't want to hear yet. They moved me onto a stretcher, strapped snug across my torso, and rolled me out into the hallway. The ceiling lights passed overhead in long, bright strips. I saw a student standing near a locker with wide eyes, and I felt a surge of shame, because I was supposed to be the steady adult in their world, not a warning about how fragile the body can be. Outside, the air hit me cold and sharp. The ambulance doors opened, and the inside was bright and cramped, smelling like plastic and disinfectant. The sirens started as they pulled away, and that sound felt like a line being crossed, like my life had split into before and after in a single wail. On the ride, I stared up at the ceiling panel and tried to breathe evenly. My mind kept circling one thought, not about my job, not about the papers waiting on my desk, not even about the fear of dying in the abstract. It was my son. Have you ever had a moment where you realized the thing you've been postponing might not be available to you anymore? Because that was the terror, not just that something was happening to my brain, but that it could steal the tool I'd used my entire life. Words, right when I finally needed them for something real. When we reached the hospital, everything sped up again. Bright corridors, voices calling instructions, hands moving with practiced urgency. I heard the phrase, ischemic stroke, and it landed like a stamp on my identity. And as they rushed me forward, unable to speak, I understood with a clarity that felt almost cruel. I had waited too long to tell the truth, and now even my own mouth might refuse to cooperate. After the rush, the stretcher, the lights, the quick hands, the clipped medical language, there was a stretch of time that felt strangely private, even though I was surrounded by people. I wasn't unconscious. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake in the most unsettling way, present enough to understand, powerless enough to feel trapped inside my own body. Voices reached me like they were traveling through water. I could hear urgency, but the syllables didn't always land cleanly. I could feel someone adjusting my arm, tightening a cuff, moving my head slightly, asking questions I understood perfectly. My mind kept answering in full sentences, clear, intelligent, complete, and my mouth kept failing to deliver them. That split made me panic in a quiet, internal way, like I was shouting behind glass. Just picture this for a moment. You're still you, still thinking, still aware, but the world can't hear you. I tried to focus on small things because small things felt like the only anchors I had. The cold air on my exposed forearm. The faint chemical smell of antiseptic. The steady beep that kept insisting time was moving forward whether I could keep up or not. Somewhere, a cartwheel squeaked, and even that tiny sound felt sharp, like my senses were turned up too high. And then my brain did something I didn't expect. It stopped trying to control the present and started pulling up the past, as if memory was the only language it could still speak freely. It wasn't one grand montage. It was fragments. Ordinary scenes with sudden weight. My son at 8 years old, standing near the kitchen doorway, waiting for me to look up from a paper I was grading. His shoes still on, backpack hanging off one shoulder. He said something, probably small, probably a question, and I remember answering without really seeing him, my voice automatic, my attention split. At the time, I thought that was normal. Now it looked like the beginning of a pattern. My son at 15, taller, quieter, more guarded. That age where kids pretend they don't need you because they're tired of being disappointed. I remember him trying to tell me something once, about school, about a friend, about a feeling, and I redirected it into advice, into structure, into here's what you should do. Because that was my comfort zone. Guidance instead of closeness. Have you ever realized you gave someone solutions when what they wanted was your presence? Then the memory I'd avoided for years rose up like it had been waiting for this exact moment. A gas station. Bright overhead lights. The smell of fuel and warm asphalt. Nothing cinematic. Just an in-between moment. One of those ordinary places where life happens quickly, where conversations get cut short because the world keeps moving. We were tense. Not screaming. Not cruel. Just tight around the edges. I can't even remember what the topic was anymore. Something practical, something that let both of us keep our feelings disguised. I remember his jaw set, his eyes looking past me rather than at me. And I remember I had the chance, right then, to step out of my usual role. I could have said something simple and true. I could have admitted what I'd refused to admit for years, that I had been emotionally absent, that pleasant had become a wall, that my son had been paying the cost of my detachment. But I didn't. I chose the safe exit, the tidy line, the controlled ending. And he walked away with a look on his face that I didn't understand at the time, or pretended not to. A look like he'd finally accepted that reaching for me only hurt. In that hospital space, unable to speak, unable to rewrite anything, I understood the sentence I'd been postponing wasn't complicated. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was one plain apology that would have changed the air between us if I'd said it when I still had my voice. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Not, I'm sorry you felt that way. Not, I did my best. Not, life was hard. Just ownership, finally. A sentence without excuses. And the terror that followed wasn't only about my life. It was about timing. Because I could feel, in my bones, that I might survive this and still lose the bridge I needed. I might live and still be unable to say his name. I might watch my son stand at my bedside and have to communicate love with nothing but weak hand squeezes and blinking, hoping he could read what my mouth couldn't deliver. Try to feel that fear with me. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of being unable to make things right. My whole adult life, I treated time like something I managed, like something I could schedule. I postponed emotional repair the way people postpone going to the doctor, assuming later would be safer, calmer, easier. But there, trapped in that stretched-out hospital time, I finally saw later for what it is. Later is not a promise. Later is a story we tell ourselves when we're scared to be honest now. I don't know exactly when the decision formed, but I remember the clarity of it. It wasn't inspirational. It wasn't heroic. It was desperate and real. If I get any voice back at all, even broken, even slow, I will stop hiding behind being pleasant. I will tell the truth the moment I can. Because I had waited too long already. When I truly woke up, the first thing I noticed was the dryness in my throat, like I'd swallowed sand. My mouth felt thick and slow, and my tongue didn't sit right, as if my own body had rearranged itself while I was gone. The room was dimmer than I expected, but still washed in that hospital light that makes everything feel exposed. A monitor beeped steadily somewhere near my left shoulder, not urgent, just persistent, like a clock you can't turn off. A nurse leaned into my view and spoke gently. I understood her immediately, which gave me a brief, foolish surge of relief. My mind was still working. I wasn't lost. Then she asked my name. I reached for it without effort. It was there, clear and simple, like a word I'd written 1,000 times on attendance sheets. I opened my mouth to say it. Nothing correct came out. Not silence exactly. Something came out, but it wasn't my name. It was a broken sound that didn't match what I meant. I tried again, harder, and felt the muscles in my face strain as if I could force language back into place by willpower. The result was the same, Wrong shape, wrong timing, wrong. The nurse didn't look surprised. She nodded calmly, like she'd seen this before, like my panic was expected. She asked me to squeeze her hands. My left hand squeezed, weak but definite. My right hand lagged, then gave a small response that felt delayed, like the signal had to travel through fog. That gap, the gap between a clear mind and a disobedient body, was where humiliation started living. I wanted to tell her, I understand you. I'm still here. I'm not confused, just trapped. But those sentences stayed inside me like locked doors. Time moved oddly after that, chopped into short visits and checks. People came in, adjusted things, asked simple questions. A therapist appeared and tested my speech, my swallowing, my ability to follow instructions. Each simple task felt like a test of whether I still deserved to call myself who I'd been before. Then the room shifted in a way I felt before I understood. Footsteps paused. The curtain moved. A presence arrived with a weight that didn't belong to nurses or machines. My son walked in. He looked older than my memory wanted to allow. Not unrecognizable, not transformed. Just older in a way that made me realize how much time I'd let pass with polite distance between us. His shoulders were broader. His face had a tiredness that comes from adulthood, from carrying a life. For a second, it shocked me how much he looked like himself and how unfamiliar it still felt. He stood near the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come closer. He tried to smile. It didn't quite hold. His eyes were doing two things at once, trying to stay calm and failing. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to say, hey, like it was normal. I wanted to say the sentence that had been pounding inside my head since the CT scan room. But my mouth didn't give me any of that. He stepped to the side of my bed and spoke quietly, carefully, as if loud emotion might break something. I understood him perfectly. He asked if I could understand him. I nodded quickly, almost too fast, desperate to prove I was still present. A nurse explained aphasia in that calm, professional tone, how speech can be disrupted even when comprehension is intact, how recovery can be slow, how frustration is normal. I watched my son listen. I watched him nod, jaw tight, absorbing information he didn't want to need. He reached for my left hand and held it. His hand was warm, steady. That warmth made tears rise instantly, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. I had spent years being composed and pleasant, years making myself low maintenance so nobody had to deal with my feelings. Now I was lying here, unable to say a clean sentence, crying in front of him. He blinked hard, like he was holding his own tears back. He didn't lecture me. He didn't perform forgiveness. He didn't pretend we were close. He just stayed. And that staying made me feel both grateful and ashamed, because it was exactly what I hadn't consistently given him when he was younger. I tried to speak again. I forced air out, tried to shape the first word, tried to push my mouth into obedience. What came out was a broken attempt that didn't carry meaning. My son leaned closer, eyes searching my face, trying to decode me. The look in his eyes wasn't disgust. It wasn't impatience. It was fear, old fear, childhood fear, mixed with anger that had nowhere to go. Have you ever seen someone you love look at you like a kid again? Not because they're childish, but because they're scared? That was the moment I understood. The stroke wasn't just threatening my life. It was threatening the only repair I still had a chance to make. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door, then came back and touched my forehead lightly, a gentle gesture that felt both adult and child at once. He squeezed my hand one more time. As the curtain fell back into place and the room returned to quiet, a colder fear settled into me. What if he comes back tomorrow, and I still can't say it? Recovery didn't feel like reclaiming my life. It felt like negotiating for pieces of it, one exhausting, humbling piece at a time. Speech therapy started the next day, and I learned quickly that language isn't just something you know. It's something your brain performs. I had spent my whole career treating words like tools, clean, reliable, always available. Now the simplest words hid from me like they were embarrassed to be associated with me. The therapist would ask me to name an object, and I would see it clearly, know exactly what it was, feel the word hovering somewhere in my mind, and still be unable to pull it forward. When I failed, it wasn't just frustrating. It was personal, like losing a part of my identity in public. Try to imagine knowing precisely what you mean and still sounding wrong. Some sessions left me sweating like I'd run a mile. My jaw ached from effort. My tongue felt clumsy, oversized, slow. And the worst part was the emotional spillover. Because when language fails, every emotion that used to be filtered through polite phrasing comes out raw. I couldn't hide behind pleasant anymore. I couldn't smooth things over with a clever sentence. If I was scared, it showed. If I was angry, it showed. If I was ashamed, it poured out of my eyes without asking permission. My son kept visiting. Not constantly. Not in a way that made everything magically warm, but steadily enough that I started to depend on the rhythm of it. He would arrive with a guarded expression, then soften as he sat down. Sometimes he brought small practical things, socks, lip balm, a book with larger print. Sometimes he brought nothing but himself and that quiet effort to be present. At first, he talked about safe topics because safe topics don't cut as deep. Work, traffic, what he ate for lunch. The kind of conversation people have when they're afraid one wrong word might open a flood. I answered with nods, with weak squeezes of my left hand, with awkward attempts at speech that made my face heat up with embarrassment. But even in those shallow conversations, something was changing. Because for the first time in years, I couldn't perform control. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. I was exposed. And that exposure, humiliating as it was, started to do something honest to me. It forced me to feel without rearranging it into neat explanations. Have you ever needed a crisis just to stop hiding from your own life? One afternoon, after a particularly rough therapy session, my hands were shaking from effort and frustration. My right hand could grip now, but poorly, like it didn't fully trust itself. A notepad sat on my tray table, the one the nurses and therapists had encouraged me to use. I'd avoided it because writing felt like admitting defeat. Writing felt like accepting that my voice might not come back the way I wanted. My son came in and asked me a simple question, something about the blinds, the light, whether I was comfortable. I tried to answer and felt my mouth fail again, the sounds coming out wrong. I saw the familiar flicker in his expression, concern, then guarded patience. And in that moment, I realized something ugly about myself. I had been waiting for perfect conditions to apologize my entire adult life. Perfect mood. Perfect timing. Perfect words. Even now, I was doing it, waiting for my voice to return so I could deliver the apology in a clean, controlled way. But clean and controlled was the problem. So I reached for the pen. My right hand trembled as I held it. The letters came slowly, uneven, like my brain had to argue with my fingers for every line. I misspelled at first. I crossed out words. I started over. A tear dropped onto the paper and blurred the ink, and I didn't even wipe it away because this wasn't about presentation anymore. It was about truth. I wrote the sentence that had haunted me since the hospital rush, the sentence I'd been saving for later, the sentence that felt almost too simple to carry the weight it carried. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I stared at it for a second, terrified by how ordinary it looked on the page. Then I slid the notepad toward my son. He took it carefully and read it once, then again. His face changed, not dramatically, not like a performance, just a quiet loosening, like something in him had been clenched for years and finally exhaled. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me with wet eyes and a kind of exhausted tenderness that made my chest ache. Then he nodded once, slow, and he put his hand over mine. Not instant repair, not a clean reset, but acknowledgement. And in that simple moment, I learned something I wish I'd learned earlier. An apology doesn't need perfect delivery to be real. It just needs honesty. I wish I could tell you that after I wrote that sentence, everything snapped back into place. It didn't. My speech returned in pieces, some days stronger, some days stubbornly broken. My right side improved, but it never fully forgot. Recovery wasn't a victory lap. It was a quiet, ongoing practice of patience. But something deeper changed permanently. Before the stroke, I treated time like it belonged to me. Like I could postpone hard conversations until I felt ready. Like later was a reliable place I could store love and apologies and truth. I used pleasant as a mask, and I told myself it was maturity, when really it was fear of vulnerability. Then my brain stole my words mid-sentence, and the illusion collapsed. Sometimes life doesn't punish you with death. Sometimes it punishes you by taking away your voice right when you finally want to tell the truth. If you're watching this and you still have your voice, I want you to notice that. Not in a dramatic way. Just notice it as the everyday miracle it is. Think about the one sentence you've been postponing, the simple one, not the grand speech. The one that would repair something if you said it. Just picture it for a moment. The person you love standing in front of you, and you realizing you waited too long. You don't need perfect words. You don't need perfect timing. You just need now.